Now in the prior video, we got you through the pre-qualification process. What does it take to get out in the car and start looking at homes? In this video, I'm going to talk about what happens once you're ready to pull the trigger. Thanks for tuning in. My name's Angela Tauscher. I'm a broker owner with Rover Realty in Mesa, Arizona. So we are doing the exciting part. We're going to look at houses now. Be sure to like and subscribe because in one of my next videos, I'm going to talk about what happens once we're under contract and it's closing day for you to get those keys. So we have the pre-qual, we're out shopping for houses. Now, a quick caveat, I hear this all the time where people will say, you know, my last realtor, they didn't even find the house for us. My goodness. And let me tell you, that was a super important detail probably 20 years ago to have the realtor help you find the actual house. But to be frank with you, pretty much everything's online these days. The value I bring as your broker is not so much that I set you that one specific house. Don't get me wrong, we're looking as well and we're calling through the list to see what we can find. But we know you guys are up all night long looking at Redfin and Zillow and all those other resources, and you're sending us those messages saying, look at this one, look at this one. So our value that we bring is in the negotiation, huge, and the experience and tenure of knowing what can we do, what can we not do, where might we have some bumps in the road, and how that process looks. I'll give you an example. Just recently, I closed a file that we had the seller and the buyer's agent brought us a cash offer, $5,000 over list, which you might be thinking, oh, it's, you know, it was probably great for you guys. But I knew right away there were a few opportunities for my seller. And what I mean by that is we were in a market where the interest rates were so high, we really weren't getting much activity on any of our listings. And so to get a cash offer at a time when cash is king, and I had not seen a cash offer at list or higher in probably a year, let me know that that buyer's agent probably didn't sell a lot of homes in the last year or two and just was unfamiliar with what our market looked like. As a matter of fact, to sell over list was somewhat unheard of, and I guarantee all the neighbors in the neighborhood love us. But there was a few other red flags. One of the things was she thought they needed an appraisal. We'll talk about appraisal in a little bit later in this episode. And then she had marked that, you know, the stove was to stay. Hey, if you watch any of my videos, you know that the stove automatically stays in our Arizona contract. We don't have to write that in. So there were some dead giveaways that let me know that this was an opportunity for my seller to negotiate some really amazing terms, which is exactly what we did. And he was very thrilled as he got that wire and took the money to the bank list. So we are out looking at houses and you find the one. I mean, you're going, okay, I think this is the one, we have to make an offer. Well, one of the most common questions I get at that point is, well, what do you think the house is worth? What should we offer? And that is a super valid question for a couple of reasons. One, you want to make sure that you're not overpaying for the house. Absolutely understand and get that. But two, we need to make sure that if you're financing the offer, that we think this house is going to appraise. Now, I'll talk about an appraisal in just a second, but at that point, I usually cannot tell you what I think the home is worth, and here's why. In order for me to properly evaluate where I think that home is going to fall on appraisal, I really need to do some digging. I need to look at the comparable closed home sales, what's under contract pending. I'm looking at all the photos on each of those homes, as well as things like location. So for example, maybe the home you love backs up to a green belt, but an exact matching home backs up to an arterial street. Well, those homes are not going to be worth the same price. So I really need to dig in, and I cannot just spit something off the cuff because that's not fair to you and it sets us up for failure throughout the transaction. Now, when we go look at houses, it's really common for us to see 3, 4, 5 houses at a time. And given that it takes me 20 to 30 minutes to really properly evaluate what I think a home is worth, I just can't do that prior to going out. But what we can do is we start gathering information. As soon as you think you are interested in that home, the very first thing I'm doing is I'm calling the other agent, and I'm looking for any items that will potentially help us win our offer. You know, it's not always price, at the end of the day for some sellers. For many of them, their hot button might be when they can close, whether it's a short close or a longer close. For some of them, they need something called a post-possession, which means they can rent back the house for a month during their transition period. There's so many factors, and it's important, it's vital that we have a conversation with the other side. I am always shocked when I get an offer on one of our listings and the agent has never once reached out to me. To me, that's just a lost opportunity to really work for your client's best interest to help them secure that home. So I call that agent, I get any skinny I can. Some agents are kind of closed-mouthed, they don't tell us a whole lot, and then others just start talking and I just stay quiet and let them talk. Because the more information I have, the better to help us potentially in our negotiation of this home to win this offer for you. So the next thing that I do is I head back to a laptop and I start my online search. And I am really looking to figure out, what do I think this home will appraise for if you are financing the home. Now, if you're cash, I still want to make sure you're not overpaying for the house, but it's not quite as critical as it can be with an appraisal situation. Once in a blue moon, your lender says, oh yeah, you're good to go. We don't need to do an appraisal, but we really can't bank on that. We need to know what we think the home will appraise for. You might be thinking, what is this appraisal thing she keeps talking about? Well, way back when the homes all crashed, 2006, 7, 8, the banks got left holding a lot of foreclosed homes. And it turns out when they tried to resell those homes that a lot of them weren't even worth a fraction of what the people had paid for them. So some new rules were put in place, and one of them being that the appraisal process became much more stringent. The banks want to make sure that whatever you're paying for the home is what the house is worth, and that should, heaven forbid, you do have to foreclose on the home and they have to take over to resell it, that they can recoup what they lent out in the first place. So an appraiser is a neutral third party that goes out and determines what they think the value of the home is, and they report that back to the bank. So the buyer doesn't get to pick the appraiser, the seller doesn't get to pick the appraiser. It's like it spins out on a bingo wheel, and whoever pops out, that's who the appraiser is. Now, when this appraiser is going to value the home, they're looking at a number of things. They typically will try and keep it as much of like to like. So in other words, if it's a one-story home, they're one story to one story. If it's a two-story, they're a two-story to two-story, if at all possible. They're also typically not going to compare a resale home that's 10 years old against new build homes down the street. They're trying to find other resale homes. The other thing that I try to pare down when I'm evaluating what I think they're going to look at is I try to keep it within about 400 square feet above or below the home that we're looking at. Then on top of that, they're doing some adjustments for if there's a pool, no pool, extra garages, upgrades like kitchen upgrades. Maybe one home has laminate counters, and then another home that's a comparable has granite or quartz. So they're going to do some adjustments for those type of things. It's pretty black and white for most of the categories, but the appraiser really gets to put their own evaluation. They have some gray areas of where they can evaluate what they think that home is worth. And this is important because, let me give you an easy example. If you're looking to make a $500,000 offer on a home and it comes back and appraises at $450,000, we have a problem because the bank is only going to lend on $450,000. So we have to either negotiate with the seller for them to come down $50,000, you to come up $50,000, somewhere in between. And let me tell you, a lot of sellers are not super open to just going, oh, well, never mind, we'll reduce the price $50,000. It just depends, you never know. But we want to try to proactively figure out a rough idea where we think the value will be from the beginning, so we don't get stuck in a weird place towards the end, because the appraisal often doesn't happen until a little bit later into the transaction. And by then, a lot of times sellers and buyers have already started figuring out, if it's a seller, where they're going to live next, moving expenses, transportation, maybe you're coming from out of state, there's airfare, there's just so much rolled in that can be pretty risky for both sides. We're always better off having a very good idea from the get-go that we think the home will appraise and we're not going to run into any issues. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, what happens if it doesn't appraise and we are completely at an impasse with the sellers? In that situation, our Arizona contract gives us 5 days between the sellers and the buyers to negotiate if we can make it work. And if we can't, then the buyer has the opportunity, unless they have already written it out somewhere in the contract, to actually cancel the contract and keep their earnest deposit. Now, unfortunately, their inspections, there's no recouping that cost, but they are no longer stuck in a contract for a home in which they don't have the funds to make up the difference if it appraised low. So as I mentioned, this is a very important part of the process. Now, if I'm on the listing side, I do everything possible to meet that appraiser at the property to actually make sure that appraiser has a list of the updates and upgrades that have been done to the home, as well as pointing out things that I discovered or found on the comparables that we use. Now, I cannot sway, goad, push that appraiser in any way, shape, or form. This is a very strict process when it comes to their evaluation. My goal is simply to be there to make sure that they are aware of any upgrades, updates, things I found out about comparables that might hurt us or help us that the appraiser just wouldn't know about. Sometimes it takes a bit of digging. So for example, I have made calls before to the agents to just kind of say, hey, it seems like your house sold for a little bit low in the neighborhood. Can you fill me in, share more? Come to find out it's maybe a divorce situation where they just wanted the house sold. They didn't care for what price. And obviously that would impact the value of the home. And I could share that with the appraiser. And sometimes that will help them decide if that is not a good comparable for them to use. So as I mentioned, be sure to subscribe. So when I drop that next video about closing day and what you need to know about getting those keys, you'll get it. And let me know in the comments, have you had a bad appraisal? How did you work through that? What happened with your house?